As Game of Thrones nears its endgame, and of course, while George R.R. Martin still shows no signs of actually finishing A Song of Ice and Fire, the debate has turned to whether or not David Benioff and D.B. Weiss are bad storytellers without source material. But even when the show was following the books, it still made plenty of changes. Some, admittedly, have ended up disastrously, most notably in their Massacre of the Dawn storyline, but other diversions actually paid dividends. Martin has, let's face it, been known to write himself into narrative dead ends or take unnecessary detours. Meanwhile, Weiss and Benioff have actually found ways of improving some aspects through cutting things out, mixing them up, or pure invention. I'm Adam from WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 changes to the Game of Thrones books that were completely justified. But before we begin, why not subscribe to stay notified? Ding, ding, done. Number 8. Robert and Cersei's marriage. In both books and show, Robert and Cersei's marriage is one of resentment. But the show goes to greater lengths to evidence that Cersei, at least, did once love Robert and hoped to make their marriage work. The scene the pair share where they're away from the crowds and it just comes down to the two of them in a room is a low-key standout from Season 1. Cersei tells Robert of her expectations and dreams and how they soured, and there's a sense of sadness amongst the bitterness. This is expanded upon further by the fact Cersei had a true-born son with Robert who died shortly after she gave birth to him. Cersei's redeeming feature has always been the love she has for her children, and that's no different when it's Robert's child rather than Jaime's. We learn that Cersei did fall pregnant to Robert in the books too, but there she didn't want to have his child and bid Jaime to find a woman to cleanse her. The series, by contrast, makes their relationship stronger, the destruction of it harsher, and her eventual betrayal even more earned. Number 7. Making more of Margaery. While Loras may be nothing compared to the novel's Night of Flowers, his sister Margaery became one of the most fascinating characters in the series and a great player of the Game of Thrones. Although regarded as clever, the format of Martin's books means we never really get a closer look at her, and there's less chance for that depth to be added. In them, she's mostly seen through the jealous and vindictive eyes of Cersei. Brought to life by Natalie Dormer on the show, Margaery is transformed into a much bigger player. Her conflict with Cersei is far more head-on as she hatches her own schemes with grandmother Olenna Tyrell and trades sly barbs with her mother-in-law. She's intelligent, shrewd, cunning, and hilarious too, making for a winning combination that allowed her to become not just a fan favourite, but a character of real strength, something that the books never allowed for. Number 6. Catelyn's relationship with Jon. Catelyn Stark is a strong character in both show and books, written as someone who'll do whatever it takes to protect her family. But the TV series does more to make her both likeable and sympathetic at the same time. Not only do they have her ask Ned to stay in Winterfell rather than push him to go to King's Landing as she does in the books, but even better, they change her loathing of Jon. Removing the line about her wishing he had fallen from the tower makes her less vengeful, and the best comes in a conversation with Talisa as she discusses how everything happened because she couldn't love a motherless child. It gives Cat a moment of grief and sorrow that endears her to the audience and makes her eventual death all the more painful. Whether or not she should have later returned in the show is another matter. Number 5. Tywin and Arya. In the books, Arya goes to Harrenhal and serves as a cupbearer, but it's to the man who'd later be killing her brother and sending Jaime Lannister's regards, Roose Bolton. In the show, Arya instead worked for the man right at the very top of the food chain, Tywin Lannister. It was, quite simply, a stroke of genius that did wonders for both characters and Season 2 as a whole. Charles Dance and Maisie Williams make for a shockingly good pairing as they engage in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Her spying on him almost but never quite learning her true identity. There was a distrust on both sides and a hatred, at least, on Arya's part that made every moment they shared incredibly tense. And yet, they were perfectly balanced by the surprisingly mutual admiration on display. Arya learned a lot from Tywin and he showed more humanity too, and they remain one of the show's strongest character pairings to date. Number 4. Brienne Vs The Hound. In A Storm of Swords, Sandor Clegane is wounded during a fight with Polliver, eventually succumbing to his wounds. While all this is going on, Brienne is still focused on her search for Sansa. In the show's epic Season 4 finale, she finds the other Stark girl coming across Arya and the Hound after the pair are turned away from the Eyrie. A bloody and brutal custody battle breaks out, which stands as one of the most violent and visceral fights Thrones has delivered. The balletic swordplay is left behind. There's no big CGI, just two equally matched warriors slugging it out in a storm of swords and stones, with Brienne winning the duel. It's a major boost for her character, who'd largely just been wandering around, and a major shock for fans of the Hound, leaving a massive cliffhanger that wouldn't be resolved until Season 6. It remains perhaps the greatest example of one-on-one combat in the entire series, and received a wonderful callback in the Season 7 finale. Number 3. No Aegon. We're introduced to young Griff in A Dance with Dragons, and in a late-in-the-day twist, it's revealed he's actually Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar, and the would-be heir to the Iron Throne. Or rather, he would be, if not for the fact everyone thinks he died during the sacking of King's Landing. To boot, his, air quotes, father Griff is Jon Connington, former Hand of the King and one of Rhaegar's closest companions. It's a big shocker, but coming in the 5th book with all the other characters moving towards the endgame, he feels more like a distraction than a genuine character. The showrunners sensed this and were perhaps even told as much by Martin himself, because they cut the storyline completely. Jorah gets grayscale instead of Connington, Jon Snow's real name is Aegon, the Golden Company is hired by Cersei, and Tyrion meets Daenerys, and they set off to Westeros together. Of course, it remains to be seen whether he's the real deal or, as expected, a pretender, but it would have been an unnecessary addition to the show, and since there wasn't much attention paid to Rhaegar's children, a twist that might not have carried any impact. Number 2. Keeping Bronn around. In the books, the path of Bronn starts off the same. He bonds with Tyrion, volunteers as champion for the Imp during his first trial by combat, and distinguishes himself during the Battle of the Blackwater. When it comes to Tyrion's next trial though, Bronn refuses, as he does in the show, and that's where things differ. Cersei gives him a chance to marry into House Stokewith, meaning that Bronn does actually get his castle, and despite occasional mentions of him, he largely disappears from the plot. The show, on the other hand, finds a way of keeping him around, sending him on an ill-fated mission to Dorne with Jaime. Not that that particular bit of invention was entirely justified, but it does at least keep Bronn around, and means he's stuck through as a reasonably big part of the show, leading up to his spectacular sequence in the Spoils of War. Alright, yes, we did have to suffer through the bad pussy line, but we got to see Bronn take on a goddamn dragon and become a more fleshed out character in the process. Add in the innumerable C-bombs that have been thrown in along the way, and this was a change that was totally worth it. Number 1. Hardhome. Hardhome, an abandoned village beyond the wall, isn't seen in the books. It's heard of through Jon, but the Lord Commander himself doesn't actually go there, sending Cotter Pike in his stead. The situation is far more dire than he feared, with the wildlings eating their dead and the whites lurking in the shadows, but it's never explored nor explained beyond a letter Pike sends to Jon at Castle Black. On the show, Jon does lead the expedition to rescue the wildlings, and all hell breaks loose. The whites attack, and so too do the White Walkers, coming out of nowhere in a quite literally chilling sequence that results in one of the most epic and harrowing battles ever put on the small screen. Hardhome is but a footnote in the books, and yet Benioff and Weiss, along with Sapochnik, turned it into one of these show's greatest hours. Hello there, you've made it all the way to the end of the video, and as part of my designated 18 hours of community service, I'm here to tell you that we have a number of other channels available for you to subscribe to, as well as other slightly, possibly not related videos for you to watch. So please do one of the things to my left or right, otherwise I have to pick up leaves on the roadside.